My name is James Harris. When the events I'm about to describe took place, I was 52 years old. I was married to the woman I loved, had 2 grown children we'd raised well, and held a satisfying job that I genuinely enjoyed. Life was good. I had everything under control. But then one night, everything changed. It all began on a Tuesday evening. I had worked late, though not so late that my wife would be worried. After the rush hour traffic cleared, I made my way home as usual. My routine included picking up Chinese takeout on the way back, which I did that night. When I arrived, I parked in the garage, pressed the remote to lower the door, grabbed my briefcase and the takeout bags, and walked inside. I felt like a hunter returning to his cave to provide for his family, or what passes as a family in the modern world. But something was off. My wife's car wasn't in its usual spot. I thought she must have gone out for some last-minute errand and assumed she'd be back soon. I set the food down on the kitchen table, hoping it would stay warm. Worst case, we could always reheat it in the microwave. I went down the hallway and headed upstairs, planning to change into something more comfortable. This was part of my usual routine. Get home, change, and eat. About 10 minutes later, I came back downstairs and called out, "Marie, are you home?" There was no answer. I frowned, puzzled. Where could she have gone? Maybe she left me a note. I wasn't alarmed yet, but curiosity was growing. I walked into the living room, and there was a note on the coffee table. But it wasn't the kind of note I had expected. It wasn't a quick scribble about a grocery run or meeting a friend. It was something much stranger. The note read, "Dear Jim, I'm sorry to do this to you, but there's someone who needs me. I got a call today, one of those calls you have to respond to when it comes. I'm sorry for running off without warning, and I know this will be hard for you, but please know that I love you more than life itself. I'll be back as soon as I can. I cherish the life we built together and hope to return to it soon. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. Your loving wife, Marie." Next to the letter was her cell phone. I stood frozen, stunned, and confused. My mind raced as I reread the words, trying to make sense of what I'd just read. Someone needs me? Who? Who could possibly be so important that she wouldn't tell me who it was? Panic began to rise in my chest. Where had she gone? How could it be so urgent that she didn't tell me where she'd be? And why would she leave her phone behind? This wasn't the kind of note a wife leaves her husband if she's planning to return later that night. Fear began to creep in, followed closely by anger. How could she do this? How could she leave without explaining why or where she was going? But then, darker thoughts began to stir. At first, I was merely concerned that she had forgotten her phone. But then it hit me. Why would she leave it behind? I read the note again, hoping it would reveal something new, but it didn't. There's someone who needs me. Who is she talking about? She wasn't a spy, a secret agent, or a world-famous surgeon saving lives. She was just Marie, my Marie. I was angry, but I knew, deep down, my anger was a mask for something far more vulnerable. Fear. I was terrified for her, wherever she was. Convinced she was in trouble, I knew she would need my help. But where would I even begin? I wanted to call her, to hear her voice, to know she was safe. But she'd left me no way to reach her. I sat there in the growing darkness, rereading the note over and over, while the takeout grew cold on the kitchen table. Eventually, I decided to start calling people. I called her sister, her friends, even our grown children. No one knew anything. Worse, no one would or could tell me anything helpful. All I succeeded in doing was scaring our children. I tried to reassure them that everything was fine, but I wasn't very convincing. I ended the calls with a weak promise to keep them updated. Now I was even angrier, not just at Marie, but at myself. I had frightened our children and stirred up a panic. I reread the note again, clinging to its words like a lifeline. I cherish the life we've created together and hope to return to it when I can. Those weren't the words of someone who would be back in a few hours, or even a few days. Fear gripped me. Despite my efforts to stay rational, I began to spiral. I decided to call the hospital. She wasn't there. Then I called the police. They told me I couldn't file a missing persons report until 48 hours had passed, unless the accusation hung in the air, sharp and bitter. Margaret's words echoed in my mind, and I struggled to comprehend what she had just implied. I snapped, "Hiding something? Are you serious right now?" Margaret stood her ground, her tone unwavering. "I'm just saying, Jim, it's strange. Marie disappears, and no one knows anything, least of all you. Doesn't that strike you as odd? She's your wife." The heat rose in my chest, and my voice trembled with restrained fury. "Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I haven't been tearing myself apart every second since she left trying to figure out where she is? You're accusing me, Margaret, but I'm the one who's been here alone, trying to keep it together while everyone questions me like I'm a criminal." The room grew silent. The weight of the confrontation was suffocating. Margaret looked away, shaking her head but not offering an apology. "I didn't mean it that way," she said, her voice quieter now but lacking sincerity. The others in the room shifted awkwardly, avoiding eye contact. One by one, they began to make excuses to leave, shuffling out until the house was finally empty again. I sat in my chair, my head in my hands, feeling a mix of anger, exhaustion, and despair. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined Marie out there somewhere, lost, scared, or worse. By morning, I was drained and overwhelmed by the same relentless questions that had plagued me since Tuesday night. Where was she? Why did she leave? Who needed her? Desperate for answers, I decided to go through Marie's belongings. It felt intrusive, but I had no other choice. I started with her desk in the study, meticulously searching every drawer and file. Her organization was flawless. Bills, receipts, letters, and notes were all neatly arranged. But nothing seemed out of the ordinary. In the very back of one drawer, I found a small envelope with my name on it. My heart raced as I tore it open, expecting to find some explanation. Inside was a key. It was small, unmarked, and unfamiliar. I turned it over in my hands, baffled. There was no note, no indication of what it might unlock. Why would Marie leave this behind? Was it a clue, a message, or just something she forgot? I searched the rest of her belongings, but there was nothing else unusual. The key was the only thing that stood out, and it offered no answers, just more questions. By evening, I was back where I started. The police hadn't called, and no one else had any news. The house was oppressively quiet, and the weight of the situation pressed down on me like a heavy fog. I sat in the living room, staring at the key on the coffee table. It felt like a cruel taunt, a puzzle piece without a puzzle. I didn't know where it belonged or what it meant, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was important. Marie's departure, the note, the key, it all felt like part of a larger mystery that I couldn't begin to unravel. I didn't know who needed her or why she left so suddenly, but I knew one thing for certain. Tomorrow, I would find out. I will never forget the tension in the room when Margaret's words finally broke through. "It's just that she's never done anything like this before," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of concern and accusation. I forced myself to bury my anger and pain deep down, keeping my tone as even as possible. "You think I don't know that?" I replied, my voice tight. Margaret was visibly shaken by my response. Her husband, Henry, my father-in-law, stepped forward and placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Jim, we know you're doing the best you can. Could you tell us what you know? Maybe we can figure this out together," he said gently. I nodded, grateful for the brief reprieve from suspicion. We sat quietly for a moment before I laid out everything I knew, or rather, everything I didn't know. I showed them the note Marie had left, and they examined it with the same puzzled, concerned expressions I had worn since the moment I found it. The air of blame that had been suffocating me seemed to lift, and for the next hour, The three of us sat together in tears, trying to come up with any explanation for Marie's disappearance. But we had nothing. No answers, no leads, just a deepening sense of loss and confusion. Henry and Margaret stayed through lunch, but the meal I prepared was barely touched. Not long after, a steady stream of friends and neighbors began arriving at the house, some carrying food, others bringing beer, all wanting to know what had happened. At first, I repeated the story to everyone who asked, but eventually I couldn't do it anymore. Henry and Margaret stepped in to explain on my behalf, and to their credit, they shielded me from further blame. They assured everyone that I was a concerned husband doing all I could, and for the most part, people accepted that. Still, I could feel the unspoken doubts in the room, lingering in the shared glances and hesitant questions. As the hours passed, the visits became a blur. One person after another sat with me, offering words of support and encouragement. I kept urging everyone to contact the police if they thought of anything that might help, though secretly, I believed someone knew something they weren't telling me. I hoped that, even if I never heard about it, the information would make its way to the authorities. But as far as I could tell, no one knew anything. A few people called the police to ask for updates, but it didn't seem to make a difference. For 2 long weeks, there was nothing, no leads, no breakthroughs, nothing. The police had Marie's car's make, model, and license plate on their watch list, but it felt like a formality. Whenever I mentioned the car, saying things like, "I hope they find her car so they can find her," people exchanged awkward glances, as though they were humoring a naive man who didn't understand the situation. But I did understand. I knew exactly what they were thinking, that she had run away, that even if she was found, she might not want to come home. I tried to throw myself back into work, but I was useless there. My colleagues gently urged me to take more time off, so I went home only to be just as useless there. I made phone call after phone call, drove around aimlessly searching for her car, and even drove past the homes of her friends, wondering if they were hiding her. But I couldn't imagine why anyone would. Day after day, my efforts led nowhere. My endless calls and drives began to alarm the police, but I couldn't stop. Desperation had taken hold of me, and I couldn't let go of the hope that I might find something, anything, that would lead me to Marie. Finally, in a moment of complete frustration, I went to see my lawyer. I needed advice, a plan, anything to break the cycle of helplessness. My lawyer suggested hiring a private investigator, and though I hesitated, I agreed. When I informed the police, they made it clear they didn't approve. Officially, they said it was my right to hire one, but unofficially, they warned me that private investigators often interfere with ongoing investigations. I couldn't hold back my frustration any longer. "What investigation?" I asked, my voice sharp with anger. "What do you have at the moment?" The officer's silence spoke volumes. They had nothing. Then how can a private investigator interfere with finding nothing? I snapped, my tone edged with sarcasm and bitterness. With that, I left the station, more determined than ever to take matters into my own hands. If the police couldn't or wouldn't find my wife, then I would with panic and guilt. Her eyes darted between me and the man in the bed, searching for words but finding none. I stood frozen, the weight of everything that had happened crushing down on me. Finally, I managed to speak, my voice trembling but controlled. "Marie, who is he?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Jim, I can explain," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Then start explaining," I replied, my tone sharp with a mixture of hurt and anger. Before she could answer, the detectives arrived. They introduced themselves and quickly assessed the situation, their eyes scanning the room and lingering on Marie and the man in the bed. One of them asked her to step outside to talk privately, but I insisted on staying. "No," I said firmly. "Whatever she has to say, she can say it in front of me." Marie hesitated, her hands trembling as she wiped her tears. She glanced at the detectives, then at me, and finally at the man in the bed. "His name is David," she began, her voice cracking. We we dated a long time ago, before I met you. He was the love of my life, but we lost touch. I didn't even know where he was until a few months ago, when I found out he was in the hospital. He has no family, no one to take care of him, and he's dying. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt a mix of betrayal, sorrow, and disbelief. So, you just left? No explanation, no goodbye. You abandoned your family to be with him. Marie shook her head vehemently. I didn't abandon anyone. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you. I thought I could just visit him, help him in his final days, and come back home. 2 weeks, Marie. I shouted, my voice rising. 2 weeks of agony, thinking you were dead or kidnapped. 2 weeks of lying to our kids, of dealing with the police and everyone else who thought I was somehow responsible for your disappearance. She broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm so sorry, Jim. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I couldn't leave him alone like this. The detectives stepped in, their expressions a mix of professionalism and pity. Mr. and Mrs. Daniels, one of them said, we'll need statements from both of you. But for now, it seems there's no crime involved here. No crime? I said bitterly, glaring at Marie. Tell that to my heart. Marie flinched, but she didn't respond. The detectives asked us to step outside, giving them room to confirm David's identity and situation. I waited in the hallway, my mind racing. Marie stayed silent, her tear-streaked face a portrait of guilt and shame. When the detectives finished, they confirmed that David was indeed gravely ill and had no next of kin. His medical records showed he had been in and out of hospitals for months, with Marie listed as his emergency contact. The ride back home was silent. Marie tried to reach out to me several times, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. The betrayal was too fresh, the pain too raw. In the days that followed, Marie moved back home, but things were different. We tried to talk, to rebuild the trust that had been shattered, but it was a slow and painful process. The kids were confused and hurt, and I didn't have the answers they needed. Marie continued visiting David, though she was careful to keep me informed this time. I didn't stop her. I couldn't bring myself to. But every time she left, I felt a part of my heart break all over again. Life eventually settled into a fragile routine, but the scars remained. Some mysteries, I realized, are better left unsolved, because the truth doesn't always bring closure. It just opens new wounds. This is a deeply emotional and poignant story that captures the heartache of betrayal and the struggle to find clarity amidst chaos. The choices and actions described reveal a journey through grief, confusion, anger, and ultimately, the resolve to move forward. While heartbreak and betrayal can shatter the strongest of foundations, the decision to step away and preserve one's dignity, respect, and self-worth is a testament to inner strength. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild, and sometimes the healthiest path forward is to accept the loss and create a new beginning. Healing is not linear. It is a gradual process of learning to navigate the pain, make peace with unanswered questions, and eventually find the courage to open up to new possibilities. The passage of time, self-reflection, and the support of loved ones can be powerful allies in this journey. Your strength in facing such a difficult situation is admirable. Moving on does not erase the past, but it allows for hope and a renewed sense of purpose. You deserve a future filled with love, trust, and mutual respect, and each step forward brings you closer to that.